What's up? How's everybody doing today? Good evening. I'm your host, Dr. Sheldon L. Akins, host of the Leading Equity Podcast, founder of the Leading Equity Center, and also the host of the Art of Advocacy. If you have not subscribed already, please support a brother, right? Look out for your boy. Hit that subscribe button, hit that bell so you get notified every single time we go live. If you're out there, feel free to say hello as well. I always like to see who's out there. We got a really good show today. Nicely planned out. And so I'm really excited to bring on our special guest. We're going to be talking about creating that equity mindset, using that soul power. I think this is going to be really interesting as we get into this topic today. So again, if you are not subscribed to the show, please do so. We're trying to build up this channel. By the way, this show is sponsored by Leading Equity, becoming an advocate for all students. That's right, for all, not just one, not just two, for all the students. That's very important. We want to make sure that we are becoming an advocate for everybody. All right, well, today's special guest is Dr. Mel. Dr. Mel is the founding consultant of Scholars for the Soul, an educational solutions firm, and has over a decade of experience working in education as a K-12 literacy instructor, college adjunct faculty member, instructional coach, and educational consultant. A lot of work there. I want to be like her when I grow up because that is pretty dope. A lot of stuff. So without further ado, I'm going to bring on Dr. Mel. Welcome, Dr. Mel. How you doing today?
I'm doing great. Thank you.
All right. I try to hype it up, get us going. I'm excited for this conversation. Soul Scholar. I can't wait to really dig into that conversation. But before we get into all of that, I just read one sentence of your bio, but I'd love for you to share with us a little bit about yourself and what you currently do.
Thank you, Sheldon, for allowing me to be in this space. Again, I'm Dr. Mel, the lead CEO or lead consultant and CEO for Scholars for the Soul, an educational solutions firm. And our bread and butter is really helping to support educators shape their tier 1 instruction around what it really means to be culturally responsive. So how can you bridge the gap between understanding cognitive neuroscience, the way the brain is emotional, and connect that to culture and use those two powerhouses as leverage within planning your instruction that's going to really bring about those changes and those growth spurts that we want to see with our kids. So we're growing them academically, but we're also growing them emotionally so that they can be their own best advocates.
So when you say emotionally, are we saying that this is a form of social emotional learning, or is that embedded within the work that you do?
I'm so glad that you asked that because it is naturally embedded within the work. So often we hear about social emotional learning having to be a silos or separate entity from how you teach and learn. But if you understand the way the brain works, you know that the limbic region of the brain is emotional. So you've got your amygdala in there that is your safety detection threat center, and understanding all of the triggers or all of the things that could come up for our students and how you can really curate a learning environment that speaks to the soul of the student. That helps you make SEL a natural, everyday, this is how we do it type of way you do instruction and teaching and learning.
Montel Jordan style, right?
It came to me. This is how we do it. Yes.
Now, okay. And you also have an event that's coming up. Why don't you share that with us as well?
So I take educators through a 4-week intensive coaching session. And so we do it virtually. It's called Teaching from the Soul coaching cohort. And so, what we do, the level one is where we start teaching educators about cognitive neuroscience. So, we break it down and slow it down, and they have access to an online course that I've created, and it utilizes the work of Zaretta Hammond and culturally responsive teaching in the brain. And we bring in a lot of other scholars, such as Dr. Goldie Muhammad in cultivating genius, and we look at how our lessons need to be curated through those ready for rigor frameworks. So we slow it down, and every week we meet on a Saturday morning for 90 minutes, and we plan out a whole entire unit or lesson plan that will really engage information processing. So timing the lesson, knowing how to ignite, chunk, chew, and review all the things. And then also portions where we're talking about soul care for the educators, because we want our teachers to stay. And we know that that's been really, really tough. So we're trying to help everybody create and establish these routines that speak to your soul so that we mitigate the possibility of burnout and teacher retention can increase.
I love that this is the work that you're doing. I think that that's very important, and because teacher burnout is real. We definitely have a lot of teachers that are out there that are, we got a lot of pressures and a lot of stress that's happening with everything happening with the pandemic and the just different rules and bannings and all these, what you can say, what you can't say, all those things can be a challenge. So I'm really excited for this opportunity to reiterate. You said that this is a 4 90-minute sessions. Are there some additional work that folks will be able to participate in as well?
Yeah, so we do it every week for 4 weeks. We have a Slack channel, so we join that, and that's the community that we stay in, and that's where we share resources with each other, lesson ideas, any articles we see that give us ideas about how to actually create the lessons. That's what we're driving, is the tier one instruction. But it's just in these 4 weeks, and it's those Saturday mornings. But I am starting to create a level two, because I found this is our third one, but some teachers really are ready to keep going and going deeper. So I want to be able to create a level two cohort that probably will be coming out maybe in March or the summer. I'm still kind of toggling through planning that, but giving them space to keep growing.
All right, I like this. This is good. There's good conversation already, and that's good work. And I think that's very supportive of what we need in our schools these days. When we talk about culturally responsive teaching, who would you say is there like is this more for your elementary folks? Is K-12? What would be your audience for this course?
It is for K-12. So I've had a micro school owner, I've had a director of social emotional learning, I've had an arts instructor, I've had an elementary school teacher, I've had middle school, high school, and I've had people from California, Oregon, Chicago, Texas, Tennessee, Arkansas, and I'm sure I'm missing New York. So we've had everybody, anybody that is wanting to learn more about this, whether they are leading it, because some of the people that came in wanted to know how their mindset needed to be shaped towards seeing instruction when they're doing evaluation, because that's important. If you don't know what to look for because you don't know what culturally responsive teaching should look like, this is a cohort to join, because we break it down to the nuts and bolts of our mindset that translates into our practice.
Folks, I dropped the link in the so it's, if you're watching on Facebook or if you're watching on YouTube, it's right there for you. The link, all that information is there. This is starting on January the 14th. Dr. Mel, if they have some folks that want like maybe group rates, they
Yes.
shoot you an email. What's the best way to get in touch if they have multiple
Yeah, so
people?
you can send us an email at info@scholarsforthesoul.com. So the same website, but info@scholarsforthesoul.com. And I do offer to do these cohorts privately. So because we keep our groups small, we don't have more than 10. So if you have a group of 5 to 10 folks at your school that want to go through this together, we can do one specifically customized for that group. And those are really nice to do because it allows you to create a scope and sequence that's specific to the needs of your school, of your teachers, of your demographics. So we offer that.
That's awesome. Okay. All right.
Yeah.
All right, I wanted to give you some time because when we talked before we hit record, or went live, I was like, this sounds like a really good program. I want folks to really be able to learn more about it. So thank you for sharing. Now let's get into the work, because I noticed you talk about soul a lot. And when I think of soul, I think of the 70s. I think of soul music and like R&B, that type of vibe, and just the mood it puts me in when I listen to that kind of music. I like to skate. I grew up roller skating, and I loved getting down on some James Brown and all those kind of things. That's my go-to. So I'm curious, what is your definition, or how do we look at the word soul in relation to education?
When you think about soul, for me, even as a young person, I was always my mom and dad. I'm the oldest of four. I'm a preacher's kid. Like, we've always had these connections to understanding ourselves beyond just the outer layer of how we show up, but what actually drives who we are. And so your soul is connected to your spirit, but your actions, it plays out, your nervous system, your body. That is how you show up to the world. So when you think about your soul, you're thinking about where your emotions are housed, how you remember and hold memories, what things you treasure, where your pain points are, the joys and the pain, that duplicity of emotions that can exist simultaneously and not mutually exclusive. So when we talk about being a soul scholar, it was something divinely given to me as this definition that I've coined, and it's a lifelong learner and a critical thinker, one who strives to connect their souls to the souls of those who they're teaching. So the point is that for me, as we think about soul care and being a soul scholar, we're not looking at education as a technical experience where we are standing there to fill our students with information, but we're creating and rehumanizing education by creating a soulful experience that naturally engages their souls and revitalizes or invigorates their spirits so that they are truly engaged with what they're learning about. Because once the soul feels that connection, it takes the learning to another place. It transcends even the time that you're in the classroom, and it makes it respond to the things that happen outside the classroom, the things you think about, the things you reflect about, the things that you hold dear to you that are treasures in your heart and soul. So it's not just robotic, I'm teaching and you're learning, but it's an experience. And that's what I want educators to see, is like, you have the magic to create an experience, but you got to get back reconnected, because for some reason we've been taught something a bit different.
So, whew, whew, you already got me. Let me take a sip of water, because yeah, that right there got me going. Because and you're exactly right. I love I mean, I wrote this down. I mean, the soulful experience.
Yeah.
So okay, you mentioned earlier that you were, rather than standing in front of the classroom, I guess lecture style,
Mm-hmm.
with our approach to teaching, which it tends to be, that's typical. That's a lot of the way that, I used to teach that way.
I did.
Um,
Mm-hmm.
Tell me a little bit more what that looks like, the soulful experience. I want you to unpack that a little bit more.
For me, I'm thinking about how teachers are starting their class. So I posted about this earlier today when we're talking about the ignite stage of the lesson. So when you're igniting students into the lesson, you have to get their attention and alertness. And the ways to do that are by presenting a challenge or presenting something that's new and intriguing, or something that can spark their curiosity. So this could mean something as simple as, I was working with a lady in the cohort who had a lesson plan, and we looked at a quote from a TED talk. And it talked about how self-awareness was like maybe the first step to revolution or something of that nature. So she presented a provocative quote. So we came up with the idea that you take this quote and you go around on paper and you move the body. The students are now moving around the room the first 5 or 10 minutes of class, and they're talking about what this quote means to them in relation to their spaces of when they've had to be self-aware. So they can have an idea of when was a time where you had to be self-aware in order to make a change in your life, or when is a time that you remembered when someone else in your family had to be self-aware in order for you to make a change. And you keep it on a level that they understand. So it could be about their grades, it could be about something they had to do in their community or in their family, but that's what's connecting the culture to what they're doing. It's even bringing in song lyrics. So you can bring in, we looked at the baby and his revolutionary song. I can't even remember the title now, but the lyrics though is bigger than black and white. And
Mm.
so it was talking about reflecting on George Floyd, the murder of George Floyd, and the lyrics reflected that. So giving students choices to look at song lyrics or to look at different pictures on the wall that are art by artists who look like them or are from communities like them, and giving them a gallery walk experience to see and feel and connect. Think of it like a museum. When you go to a museum, the point is for you to engage with things that are on the walls or engage with things that have been created and connect in your soul with that art, whether it's songwriting, whether it's poetry, whether it's quotes, whether it's a TED talk. But you're connecting in order to have an experience that will now push you into the content. Because now I've primed that brain, I'm getting it warmed up, and now we can bring some content.
Got you. Okay, so I had a chance to look it up. So, Little Baby, the bigger picture.
Yeah, yes,
Okay.
that's the title. Mm-hmm.
I haven't seen the video, but I'm watching it. I got it on, got it queued up over here, but so I'll check it out a little later. But here's the thing that I really like about you, just how you talked about the soulful experience, is you're relating stuff that your kids, your students are seeing, like dealing. I'm assuming a lot of your students probably listen to the Little Baby and the song, and you can bring all that information and again create that soulful experience. Now, here's a question that I get a lot, right? Especially when it comes to hip hop culture, when it comes to hip hop pedagogy. Oh, I don't represent or I don't identify as someone who listens to hip hop, but maybe my kids are that's their go-to music. What can I do to have a create that authentic soulful experience without me feeling like I'm going outside of my own comfort zone or my, I guess, my understanding of that culture, and still be able to provide that soulful experience? What type of response would you have for that?
I would say to be in a space of curiosity. So in that space of curiosity, you're open to actually partnering with your students to come up with ideas for how you can utilize important figures or important songs or things that they may not even know about. Like the thing is, you don't always have to bring in the songs that they know, but if you can connect it with the beat that they feel in their soul, if you can connect the message with something that they're experiencing and they can see representation in that. You don't have to go outside necessarily of who you are just to be important enough to bring this material to your students. But there is, and there are a lot of good curriculum out there. One is by Jamila Sims, which is We the
Mhm.
what is it, SEL for the culture, and she already curates these kind of instructional lesson plans. And so I say, if you can't or don't understand how to get into it, patronize people who are doing the work and allow the students to partner with you and say, hey, what do you think about us bringing this in? Because I was thinking about this, but I may need you all's help because this is not my thing. Right?
Mhm.
Keep it real with your kids because they will respect that more than you trying to tokenize their culture and use it in a way where it becomes more of a mockery versus an invitation for you to engage with them.
You hit it right on the head. Like I tell folks, I said, listen, if it's not your thing, this is such a great opportunity to co-teach, to learn from your students. Like
Yeah.
let them teach you. But again, sometimes we're just so focused on I have to be the expert. I have to know everything. I'm here to present the content to you so that you can bring, show me what you've learned. The banking system, I make those deposits and then I'm going to make those withdrawals when I'm done. And I love the way that you're framing this, which leads me to my next question with regards to assessments, because often we are stuck with benchmarks or accountability issues, standardized testing. And so when we want to create our own lessons and create those soulful experiences, often those soulful experiences aren't on the tests that the kids need to learn.
Right.
So I'm just curious on your end, how do we create that soulful experience and still have our students meet those accountability measures that a lot of teachers are having a lot of pressures under?
So I'm going to say what I did because I was in the classroom for more than 10 years and I typically taught seventh, eighth, or ninth grade English language arts. And a lot of the students that I would work with, many of them did not like to write. And they would sometimes read, but writing was really a challenge. But I just kept it real with them. I would discuss with them, first of all, you all, we are in a society that measures you by standardized testing. Let's just talk about that. And I would always, even with my own children, I have a 12 and a 15-year-old. And I talk to them about how testing has been shaped in our world. And so I let them know that I know that you're a genius and I know that you're smart and you need to know that. But the way that others can know that so they can know how to support you is by you showing up. So you have to show up on this paper. You got to show us how you're actually planning out argumentative essay writing for eighth graders, for example. So we would go through, and what I often found in my instructional coaching role is that teachers, especially those teaching like writing, we threw out the whole standard and wanted to teach the entire thing instead of unpacking the standards. So that's one thing that I did in the cohort with one of the teachers, or with the whole group, is I talked about when we're creating this lesson plan, you've got to break down this standard to think what things have to be known in the brain, what skills have to be known in order for a student to be able to determine point of view, right? So what is the background knowledge that needs to be there? And how do you know if your students know that already? Because sometimes we go into the assumption that, oh, well, they're in the eighth grade, they should know that. So when you're assessing students, not classes. So you should know where each student is on those benchmarks or on those substandards so you can see where your students are growing. And so I talk about building teacher alliances with the students. So we're setting goals together. I see here that I've done, like at the beginning of the year, a lot of people do those preliminary essays or those diagnostics or whatever. So you kind of get an idea of where your kids are. So now you break that down and you look with your students and you highlight the positives. You highlight the creativity. You highlight the expression. You highlight the African American vernacular English that was used as different language choice. You highlight whatever you can highlight. And then you also talk with them about, these are things that I've noticed where I get to do my job and partner with you to help you grow. Where do you want to start? What can we pick? And now we're working together strategically every week to grow in just this small chunk skill. And they need to see the growth as they go. So you give them wise feedback. And we talk about that a lot, what wise feedback actually is and how the student can be observers of their own growth. Not just you saying you got an 80% B this week, next week you got an 85%. No, you actually were able to write a complete sentence and use punctuation in the middle. And now you're bringing together your collective thought in this introductory paragraph. I love that hook. Look how powerful that was. That really captured the audience's attention versus what you did last week. I was still left questioning it. See how you've grown? And now the student can also see how they're growing. And you're coupling that with that rapport building, that trust building. And now your students can see their own growth and they're slowly becoming more confident in their own ability as a learner. Because that's the issue. Our babies don't believe that they're strong learners.
Why do you think that is? Why do you think they don't believe that they're strong learners?
There's been messages sent about our students, whether articulated directly or indirectly. So you think about deficit-based thinking, and I know you had Byron and Kelsey on a while ago, but with this book, deficit thinking, hacking deficit thinking, This is something that our students have received messages about themselves, whether they're looking on social media, whether they're being treated differently than other students in their classroom. And this is what I mean by the soulful experience. Students know when they're being ignored in the classroom. They know when you're not giving them the attention they deserve. They know when they're getting on your nerves, and they know when you don't even want them to be there. Then they also know when you're radically welcoming them anew after a horrible day yesterday. You're wiping the slate clean and you're giving them more grace and new mercy every day, right? They feel that in their soul. So if they have this idea, because I've had students that told me, oh, my second grade teacher told me I was stupid. Or my other teacher, like teachers have, some people have actually articulated very harmful and toxic messages. And then it's been other things that have showed up where students are not given opportunities to be in classes that are challenging, or are taught by teachers who only believe, oh, they can't do that. That student's not going to be able to read. I've been in those situations. I've heard teachers say, oh, no, I just have to give them worksheets. You got to break it down. You got to give them crayons. And they had these 8th grade students doing 2nd grade activities because that is what they believe their capacity to be. But it really reflected that the teacher only believed they had the capacity to teach to that and not rise or raise those students up to where they actually deserve to belong. So it's a lot of mental stuff happening that kind of constitutes that deficit-based thinking. So it takes a layer, and not even a layer, it takes a journey of this idea of critical self-reflection to continue to unpack why my behavior shows up the way that it does. What does it really reflect about my belief system and my ways of being that are pushing me to subconsciously just engage in this behavior that's actually deficit-based and not strength-based?
Okay, so let's move to that, because you said I like to write stuff down. Critical self-reflection. What kind of work does that require us to do? Is that journaling? Is that something else that you want to share with us? But I'm curious. What does that look like?
So personally, for me, critical self-reflection has been something that, I've had a lot of different struggles in my life. From I've had a supportive family, but then I've also had different situations of, enduring a home invasion and being really fearful of living on a lower leveled floor, and going through divorce while I was getting a PhD and raising 2 kids. I've had a lot of challenges. And so for me, the work of soul care and this personal self-reflection has become my mantra. It is my lifeline. And I encourage people to engage in critical self-reflection because there are so many layers of conditioning that we have gone through as humans in this world, from the representation or the lack thereof on our media channels, to the different opportunities or the lack thereof given to us, specifically us, meaning me, you, as Black people and Black folks in America, or in globally for that matter. But there's this idea of the journey of self-excavation. So you think about an archaeologist, and this is the work of Dr. Yolanda Seeley Ruiz, and she talks about she talks about self-excavation. And I always picture this metaphor or this analogy of digging deep, uncovering the different layers of who we are, our identity, how we see ourselves, that's also connected to how other people see us and experience us, to get down to the core, to discover who we really are without the labels, without the conditioning of society, without the influences of our family, but like, who are we at the core of our souls? And so doing critical self-reflection for me has meant journaling. I'm a believer. I'm a believer in God. And so I write prayer letters. I have, morning meditation. I do prayer. I engage in different forms of worship and things that are important to me that have kept me connected. I can even remember a couple of weeks ago, I had something that was very stressful. And I remember a time that I would have been overwhelmed by that stress. And I rejoice in the fact that my journey has brought me to a place where, even though I experienced a painful moment, I allowed myself space to experience a painful moment. I didn't rush past it. I didn't think I needed to push forward. I allowed myself to experience it. And then I processed what I was feeling and why, and what connections were being made to my child. Because you got to go back to the first time you ever felt that rejection, or the first time you ever felt that abandonment, or the first time you ever felt excluded. Whatever the feeling is, you got to go back to the first time to be able to heal that part of you so that you can keep growing. And so that critical self reflection could look like meditating, taking nature walks. I like to sit on my porch in the morning, watch the cars go by. I have a swing porch. I sit there sometimes and I just look and watch. Sometimes I write in my journal. Sometimes I read scripture, or sometimes I read books. It's whatever you need to try out if you don't have a routine that allows you to go deeper. But I will say this before I stop. Is that there is a space for joy and pain to coexist.
Okay.
So I do want people to understand that on the journey of life, unlearning some things, there will be some painful moments, but I always encourage people to choose joy for the journey. Choose to engage in the art of being patient with yourself and showing compassion and love to yourself as you go back and reflect on some of your choices that you may not have been the most happy with. Give yourself the room that if you may have known better, maybe you would have done better, but you didn't. But that wasn't a wasted opportunity. That's also an opportunity for you to share the wealth of what you've learned. It's only when we push and don't stop and reflect that we miss the jewels, and we miss the opportunities to experience the joy in the journey. We rush, 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 because society has taught us we need to hustle and grind, and we got to keep going. We got to get the bag. We got to do the things. But we've got to also slow down and choose joy and see joy even in the pain. What did I learn? And who can I share this with so we can all, not just me individually, grow, but radically as a community? That is how we grow.
You're bringing a fire today, Dr. Mel. I love this. Here's the thing, because I'm glad you touched on this, because sometimes when we do that reflection, let's say we do, and I do this, I have done this, and I do this a lot. I still do this, where it's like, man, I should have said something else, or like I'm beating myself up as I'm reflecting, because I do a lot of reflecting. I don't journal. I hate writing, but I will journal in my head, I guess.
Yeah.
And I will reflect on some issues or some missed opportunities. And I'm just going through my head, and I beat myself up sometimes, thinking about, man, I should have gone this direction, or I should have said this instead. Stuff comes up to me afterwards, like, man, why didn't I think of that in the moment? So I like the fact that you brought in, okay, yeah, you might have made a mistake, and that's part of the journaling process, and that's part of that self-care. However, it's not a necessary, there's still supposed to be some joy that I think I am paraphrasing. I'm probably not going to get it exactly the way you said it, but it was essentially what I gathered was celebrate the joy and the pain together, in a sense, in order to move forward. Is that what I heard?
Yes. Yeah. Choosing that joy. Because if you're going to have those voices that come up,
Mm-hmm.
that is telling you that you shoulda, coulda, woulda, but you've got to overpower and amplify another voice. And so the other voice is going to be louder than that voice, because
Yeah.
it's going to say, while I could have done this, this is what I've actually learned in this opportunity, right? And then I'm going to also affirm myself that I am still a growing person. We think we got to know all things all the time.
Mhm.
And you only have one brain. So
Right.
as learned as we are, as smart as we are, as intentional as we may be, you're a whole human being who is going to probably mess up every single day. So if we normalize that and reject this idea of perfectionism that is a falsehood, it does not exist, but we're in a rat race thinking we're going to get to something that's like a cloud. As soon as you touch it, it's going to escape out of your hands.
Mm.
Your soul can't connect to perfectionism because the humanity of you can't achieve that. It's a striving for excellence that you want to push for, not perfectionism.
Excellence, not perfection.
Yeah.
Love that. Okay, okay. So how does okay? So I let's say, and I think the thing about the self reflection is there is no. I don't. I mean, correct me if I'm wrong, but there is no you've arrived. Like this is an ongoing journey. This is not okay. I've done self reflection this week. I'm good to go. I don't need to do this ever again. Like I'm assuming this is something that we need to do all the time.
Correct. It's a journey. It's a
It's a journey.
cyclical process. So we
Yeah.
don't think of it linearly as a start and stop, right? You hear the saying, commit to the marathon, not the sprint. It is
Hmm.
a cyclical journey. And so even the idea of when people talk about cultural competence, I have learned, as I've learned about cultural humility from two Black women doctors who coined the term cultural humility based on their work in hospitals during the Rodney King riots. I think their names are, one is Dr. Melanie, I remember, or yeah, Dr. Melanie, just because it's my first name. But if you look up cultural humility, you'll find these two women who are doctors, but they responded to this idea because we often think that cultural competence, it denotes that you will know everything about every culture. Culture is always evolving because people are always changing. So what may have been good in the 70s is not applicable in the 2020s, right? So some parts of our culture may remain, some of the essence of our culture may remain, but things are always shifting and changing. So as you embody not cultural competence, but this idea of cultural humility, you sit back and say, I'm always learning. So if I'm always learning, that means I'm always reflecting. And if I'm always reflecting, that means I have to always choose time to slow down the process and actually take time to reflect and think and read some books and learn from some other scholars and integrate that into your work.
So I found this here, this article, cultural humility versus cultural competence, and why providers need both, is what they're saying. I don't know if you can see it; it might be a little small for you,
Yeah.
but I just kind of Googled real quick, and because I was trying to find the folks that coined this actual term here, cultural, because it sounds like this article is talking about how actually obviously there's a difference between humility versus competence, but they're saying that we probably should consider having both of them. I didn't read the article yet, but it's just kind of giving some points here. So I don't know if you have any thoughts on that at all.
Yeah, I'm trying to find the ladies' names because I would really love to give them the credit, and maybe I
Right.
can find it later. But no, they were saying this idea of when you're thinking about cultural competence, competence, if you think about the word competence, is thinking about this idea of I know. And so if you know, right, competence means the ability to do something successfully.
Hmm.
So being able to reflect and be humble in the way you approach culture, in the way you approach people, in the way you approach your service to mankind in whatever capacity you hold could be the vantage point through which they're making their point. I'm not sure, I hadn't read that article. But when you're culturally when you walk in cultural humility, one of the tenets of that was being a lifelong learner. And that means that you're always in a space of curiosity, which lends your ear to listening. That's a part of reflection that oftentimes we keep out is we only listen to ourselves. We only reflect on what we believe. But if you haven't lent your ear to those whom you're serving, then your self-reflection becomes isolated and can become toxic if you don't join it or couple it with the reflections of other groups, and especially those groups of people that you're either partnering with or that you're serving in whatever capacity that you do that work.
Got you. So okay, after I've done this, how does the soul care, the critical self reflection, how does this all relate to being an equity centered educator? I'm curious the connection between those.
Okay, so I will say this, and then I'll come back to that. I
Okay.
found the ladies' names:
Okay.
Melanie Turvalon,
Mhm.
and I'm gonna put this in the chat. And maybe if people want to read this article, is actually written by them, so they can check that out and learn a little bit about that from a medical perspective. So it's Melanie Turvalon from Children's Hospital, and then Jan Murray Garcia. So these two women talked about cultural humility, and they have a whole documentary that's on YouTube. It's very short, about maybe no more than an hour, but it's a good interview. Now, ask me your question again, Sheldon, so I can answer that. I got caught up in trying to find their names. I couldn't let it go.
So the question was, how does the critical self-reflection and soul care, how does that relate to being an equity-centered educator?
Okay, good. So I'm glad you asked that. I have been blessed with the book, Culturally Responsive School Leadership, by Muhammad Khalifa. And he talks in this book, he does a case study with a school, and he talks about the perspective of Joe, who is the leader of this school, and the different dynamics that create and really uphold true culturally responsive school leadership. But as he talked about critical self reflection, there is this idea of you are either going to be resistant to oppression and minoritization of our students, or you're going to be complicit in allowing it to continue. So if you're choosing that, then you're choosing the different styles. And he outlined these different types of critical self reflection. So I'm going to name some of them off. Personal critical self reflection. And we've talked about that pretty much for the duration of our time together. But then he goes into content critical self reflection. So this is looking at specifically like the work that I do in lesson planning, or even the work that you're doing in the way you evaluate teachers, the way you hold space inside of your staff meetings. What does that content look like? How do you communicate with parents? Is it in their native language? Are you involving them there? Anything that's going out to the people, how are you reflecting on power, privilege, and positionality in the content that you're creating and sending out to families? Then it's structural critical self reflection. So, looking at course placements for your students, looking at how you're giving resources and using those resources as leverage to help those students who may be more disadvantaged. Then he gives community based. And this is the one I really love that kind of connected to what I was speaking about earlier. When you're talking about community based schooling, you're thinking, or community based schools, you're thinking about how am I engaging and partnering with families and communities to co-create spaces of higher learning and engagement for our students. So what that means is I'm not just going to highlight an effort for parental involvement. I want parental partnership. I want to be partnered with parents in a way that I am hearing what's working at home. I am hearing the issues that students are facing in their neighborhoods, in their communities. I'm also hearing their hopes and dreams. It doesn't always have to be the negative end. I'm also hearing what they do outside of school, the little league, the summer leagues that they're in, the different things that make up the totality of these students, the churches they go to, the choirs they may sing in, all of the things that they do are brought into the space where students, teachers, families, and community, all stakeholders come together to make decisions for how schooling is done. And then he talks about organizational critical self reflection. So, this is how you're hiring people, those operational ideas. How do you make sure you're hiring a diverse staff? How do you make sure that they're committed to the same issues of fighting oppression and providing what's necessary to be equity centered? And then the last one is sustainable critical self reflection. So, how are we holding each other accountable as a community to ensure that equity is the core center value for how we do everything that we do? How are we tracking culturally responsive leadership and culturally responsive teaching? Not just saying, oh, because we brought some diverse text into the lesson plan, that's culturally responsive. No, how are we actually looking at this as the way in which we engage our students? How are student voice brought into the lesson? Did they help you co-create the lesson plan? Do they get to decide the projects that they're doing? All kinds of markers and indicators that allow you to now make your intention match your impact. Because we have all the greatest intentions, but Dina Simmons talks about this all the time. And to paraphrase, if your intentions don't meet your impact, the work that you're doing is not holding the value that you think it is.
Mm.
And so when you critically self-reflect, you can't just have your own voice in your head. You got to actually also be looking through all these different ways I just listed off of how to see the operations of your school and to look at what these things are that we're doing. What belief system is this reflecting? What values does what we did in the way we created this policy on dress code, what does that really mean we believe about our kids?
Mm.
And so doing that kind of work, like I got to do that work with a couple of bigger organizations, and it was very eye-opening for them to see, oh, this is really aligned with white supremacy culture, and we didn't think it was. But in our equity statements, we say that we are fighting for equity and justice, but we're actually perpetuating this in the, not even the way they dealt with the students, but it was more so with the way teachers and administration were engaging with each other. They saw the connections there. So the work is worth the work. It's worth it.
Did you just say the work is worth the? Say it one more time.
The work is worth the work.
Mm.
So doing this work is worth the arduous nature, the times where you're going to feel discomfort, you're going to feel a little triggered, you're going to feel a little defensive. But when you know what that is, that's just white supremacy trying to come up. When you know what that is and you normalize that we may all feel this in this moment. So let's normalize what we're going to do to get past it and keep doing the work because it's worth it. It's worth it.
I love that.
Thanks.
Listen. I have truly feel like I've been blessed with your knowledge and just the fire that you brought today. I mean, you're very passionate, obviously very passionate about this work, and the soul. Like I could see that coming through, and I think this is some amazing. The work that you're doing is amazing. I'd love for you to maybe share with our audience maybe a final thought that you could, last, take us home, if you will, with your final thoughts for our conversation today.
I would say to educators who are listening, especially even our leadership, is that the change has to start within. So I love quoting Lauryn Hill,
Oh.
how you gonna win if you ain't right within?
Mm-hmm.
Um, from Do Wop That Thing. But I love that quote and that line because it calls us to love ourselves enough to do the inner soul work. Love yourself enough to know that you are worth taking time with yourself. Schedule in time within your week, within your day, especially for our leaders. I know there's a friend of mine, Principal Patterson, who's always posting because she's a leadership coach. And she's telling people, did you eat lunch today? Like simple things like, did you eat lunch today? Take time where you close your door, turn on whatever kind of music either relaxes you or gets you hyped, wherever you need to go for that moment, and take time to do the work for yourself, whether that work is allowing yourself time to wind down and be calm and tranquil, or whether that work is a bit hard. Whether that work may require you to partner with a therapist or be in a support group or talk with family or reconnect with your social networks. Whatever that is, you got to believe that you deserve that time for yourself. So practice self love, practice self acceptance, accept where you've come from, accept what you've done, harmful or not, good or not, and also accept that you're on a journey and your commitment to growth now is worth the work.
Worth the work. I love that. All right, good stuff. Thank you so much. If we have some folks that, I mean, obviously, folks, we have Dr. Mel's website is scrolling down at the bottom there. But if we have some folks that want to connect with you, what is the best way to reach you online?
Um, so I'm on all the places. So you can go to our website. There's a contact form there, and I can get back with you. I love to actually chat in this way, talk with people, just to see how we could possibly partner and do this kind of work. I love providing professional developments, but let me just say this. I don't do one and done professional developments. So we must be committed to the journey of the work because our teachers deserve more than just a 30 or hour talk. If it's a keynote talk, a motivational talk, that's fine. But if we're really talking about professional development, we've got to be committed to this work and give them the support that they need. So you can catch me there. I'm on social media, Instagram, Facebook at Scholars, the number 4, the Soul. So Scholars for the Soul. You can catch me there as well. I answer DMs. I'm not famous, so I talk back. So if you want to holler at me, if you got questions, I'm just a Southern girl out here trying to change the world. So hit me up.
All right. Well, Dr. Mel, it has truly been a pleasure. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you. I've enjoyed it.
Well, folks, I truly enjoyed that conversation. It was a lot of fun. I learned a lot. I mean, about this. I think my biggest takeaway with this, I mean, just the whole idea of the soul in the relation to social emotional learning and just considering human beings at the end of the day. I think that's really important. Shout out to Patrick Larkin. Hope you're doing well, man. Thanks for joining us today. Um, you know, the soulful experience was probably one of my other biggest takeaways was just, we tend to, and I've done this as well as a teacher, stand in front of the class and give that lecture style. I mean, I was a history teacher, so I used to love to tell the story. And there wasn't a lot of cooperative or even project-based learning that was involved in my classroom early on days. And so it was really good to be able to listen to the idea of soulful experience. How can I take or tap into my kids, my students' experiences, things that they, music that they listen to, movies that they watch, whatever things that they're passionate about? How do I bring that into the classroom? Not only that, even if I do not personally identify or subscribe to some of the content that my students are subscribed, what they watch, I can still learn from my students and just be honest, open, and vulnerable, and just let them know, listen, this is not my thing. I don't know anything about this. However, I want to learn with you. I want to grow with you. And I think if we have that type of mindset, that can really change a lot of things today. Stay encouraged, teachers. I know it's a lot going on, and we're coming up. We're recording this right before the holiday break, winter break. So, folks, stay encouraged. Take some time if you can to relax, recharge yourself as we get back to school in January. So just do your best. I know it's stressful. I just want to make sure that you stay encouraged throughout all of this. Remember the words of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. If you can't run, then walk. If you can't walk, then fly. Oh my gosh, I messed that all up, man. Let me start that over. If you can't fly, then run, walk. Oh man, today is not my day. Remember the words of Dr. King, though. He does talk about keep moving. I am messing it up. I don't know if I'm nervous or what, but remember those words. Keep moving no matter what. Stay encouraged, folks. Let's continue to be a voice in leading equity.